On today's Locked On Texan podcast, we continue with our training camp preview. Today, we're looking at the big boys up front on the D line. Cody and I both think there could be an overlooked training camp battle between Jerry Hughes and John Grenard.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Hump Day Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Say it with me. Your team every day. I am John, some sports guy Hickman. Of course, I'm joined by Sports Illustrated's own and Texan credential beat reporter Cody Davis. If you guys are new to the Locked On Texan podcast, do us a favor. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, including YouTube as well, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. If you are one of our everydayers from the Himalayas, thank you again each and every day for checking us out as we talk Texan football, which we are only a week away. We're a week away. Some teams reported back today. Got the Chiefs, got other teams that reported back today. And for the Texans, I understand because this Texas heat is a whole lot different than a lot of other these places. So I get it. You want to make sure they get enough time as possible.
It's
hot. It's hot. Oh, it is hot. But you know what?
We're going to be standing out there, man. I'm sorry, but bro, I was hoping D'Amico have practice at 7 like Lovie Smith did. We got out of there about 10:30 before the real heat started. He got us out there at 9, which means we probably ain't leaving till like 12:30, bro.
It's gonna be all right. It's gonna be all right.
I'm gonna have extra light because I'm gonna get darker. Come on, man. Like,
it's gonna be all right simply because
Lord.
that heat is kind of how this season is gonna go. I think little heat for this team. We gotta look at the rookie expectations for Will Anderson Jr., who got the highest rated defensive rookie rating on Madden, so that's going to be fun. The interior battle, Cody, is something that I think is important to look at. Maybe not necessarily between the top two guys, but the back end guys, right? But let's kick the show off with John Grenard, the 4-year NFL D lineman coming out of Florida, up and down in his career so far, versus the vet Jerry Hughes, who led this team in sacks last year.
Yeah, and I want everybody to just keep in mind that I think out of everybody on the roster who's entering training camp, I think John Grenard has the most to lose because, John, as you just alluded to, he's going into his 4th season. It's been up and down. We already know that this young man has showcased promise. He has showcased potential throughout his first 3 years in the league. However, we already know health has been his primary concern. But the biggest thing to me going into training camp is the fact that John Grenard is a guy who has been one of the Houston Texans' primary starters on the defensive line, especially on the defensive end. And I'm interested to see how he's going to approach training camp this year. Because, look, if the season started today, let's say if today was week 1 of the regular season and the Texans were already in Baltimore to face off against the Ravens, I think everybody, including myself, is expecting D'Amico Ryans to have Will Anderson Jr. on one end of the defensive line and veteran Jerry Hughes on the opposite side of that defensive line, which means, what does that mean for John Grenard? Because, look, outside of his rookie season, this is a young man who has appeared in 20 games. And out of those 20 games, he started 16. And every time he did not start, it came after he was coming back from an injury. Last year, remember, he took a lot of time off. I can't remember what he went down with. I think it was a foot injury or something along those lines. But he came back and did not start during those final 3 games of the 2022 campaign. However, John, we talk a lot here on this show over the last couple of weeks about training camp battles. And if John Grenard believes, and he should, and I will 100% agree if he has this mentality, if John Grenard still believes that he is a starter, this is the question. Who is he going to be battling for that starting spot as a defensive end? There's only 2 guys, Will Anderson Jr. and Jerry Hughes. I would be shocked if the Texans do not start Will Anderson Jr. come week 1. I do not believe that you go out there and trade a hefty package for one of, if not the best draft prospect in last year's draft, and just to say, you know what, we're going to start you off the bench. No. Will Anderson Jr. was arguably the best prospect last year. The Houston Texans got him, and I believe he's going to be a starter come day one, which means this is a secret training camp battle nobody is talking about. John Gardner versus Jerry Hughes. I understand Jerry Hughes had a phenomenal year last year, led the team in sacks with 8, was very good. He's a veteran for that position group, for the defense, and for the whole entire team, a veteran leader, somebody that you need in your locker. However, the Houston Texans are still in the early stages of their rebuild. And I think the Texans will benefit more if John Gardner showcase that, one, he is still a starter, and two, showcase that he can beat out an aging veteran, because Jerry Hughes is 34 years old, and at the start of next season, he's going to be 35. I believe his birthday is like August 11th or August 12th, somewhere along those lines. Plus, John Gardner, this is a very important season for him, because not only is he going into his 4th year, but he needs to showcase some film, whether to the Texans, rather to the other 31 teams around the league, to showcase that he deserves a very good contract, because this is a contract year for him.
So I have a positive outlook when I look at this camp battle, right? So I think there could be some good when you look at the overlooked battle between John Gardner and Jerry Hughes. So from an front office standpoint, a coaching standpoint, you want to see the young guy beat out the older vet, right? Like and I think the reason why is you want to see how much of an investment will John Gardner pay off. Jerry Hughes only has 1 year left on his deal. For John Gardner, this is a contract year for him. He wants to either, like you said, Cody, get an extension with the Houston Texans or one of the other 31 teams in the NFL. So if he goes out there and ball out, which a lot of players do when they play in Houston for that contract year, that's a good thing for Houston contractually, because he's not going to command a lot in any market, right? And so he'd be affordable, and I think he'd be a guy that for the right price you keep around for a couple of years and also still add to that position, right? But the battle is important to watch, guys, for rotational purposes. That's why this overlooked battle is important going into training camp. Listen, if Jerry Hughes is playing in more than 65% of the defensive snaps early in the season, then that means there was either an injury or Gardner was simply not the better player during training camp. Or it could mean Coach Shazier, Matt Burke, D'Amico Ryans may want to go DN by committee, right? So you would allow your rookie, Will Anderson Jr., who you traded a whole lot to get in the NFL draft during the 2023 draft, you allow him to get that heavy rotation of plays, while Jerry Hughes and Gardner hold it down on the other side by splitting reps. So, for example, there is a lot of equivalence to what the 49ers did and what we presume the Houston Texans will do. Hughes and Gardner could be in that same boat as Charles Omenihu, former Houston Texan, and Samson Ebukam. 2 guys that were very effective for their defensive front, both playing around 50% of the defensive snaps. They accounted for 10 snaps. They accounted for 10 sacks and nearly 30 QB hits, right? So that's the positive in that. Jerry Hughes could beat out John Gardner. John Gardner could beat out Jerry Hughes. But should either one of them command a lot of the defensive snaps when that position is already thin in terms of who can we bank on? You got Will Anderson at the end position. Chase Winovich is a guy that I would kind of look at, but I'm not sure where he fits in the Houston Texans' plans. However, he is better when he's coming off the edge as a linebacker, as an outside linebacker. But when we look at those 2 guys, right, it could be in Houston's favor to allow them to actually split a lot of these reps. And I think we can look at head coach D'Amico Ryans, who said it before. He has made it clear nobody has a starting role. And I think whoever he puts out there means they just perform the best during training camp. They perform the best during preseason. By the time the regular season starts, whoever performed the best when we evaluated our roster, That's who's going to go out there and get the nod. That's great. But I don't think at this point of his career, Jerry Hughes should be playing in 70% of the snaps. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen enough from John Gardner to say he deserves 70% of the defensive snaps, right? And I'm not sure if he's played 70% of the defensive snaps before since coming into the league. I think the highest he may have played maybe 61. I know that's close to 70, but it's still not 70. So for Will Anderson, yeah, you get the majority of the load. We traded a lot to get you. We want you to play some football. But for the other two guys, it could be in Houston's favor to allow both of them to come in during situations, during rotations, during 3rd and 9 may be a little bit better for one guy compared to 3rd and short where you may trust another guy to make a play. It could work out. That's the positive outlook. And going into training camp, the battle is overlooked, Cody. You are 100% right. Mm-hmm. But the battle could also be something that works out in Houston's favor. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that is safe, secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. We just talked about John Gardner. We just talked about Jerry Hughes. Still got to mention the likes of Chase Winovich, again, the rookie Dylan Horton. But back to those two guys. Is there a possibility we see one of those players not make the team?
If I can answer this one real quickly, I would say no. Because both of those guys, they are still valuable to what the Houston Texans want to do on that defensive front. Especially considering, John, as you put it in the first segment, how everything that we have seen San Fran do over the last 2 years when DeMeco Ryans was that team defensive coordinator, we are expecting him to carry that over here in the city of Houston. And then, look, we talk a lot about John Gardner here on this show. It's because that young man has so much promise, so much potential when he's healthy. And in 2021, he led the team in sacks with 8. Last year, Jerry Hughes led the team in sacks with 8. So I truly believe both of them will be a part of the 53-man roster. However, that question leads us to what we want to talk about in this next segment. And that's, once again, I kind of feel like when you look at the defensive line unit going into training camp, I truly do believe that it has fallen under the radar because there's so much talks about what's going on with the wide receiving corps, the quarterback room, the secondary. But there is another interesting battle taking place on that defensive front, i.e. the interior of that defensive line. And I think there's 3 guys who could possibly be on the bubble of making this roster. That's Thomas Booker, Kirk Hennig, and Roy Lopez.
Yeah, so before I go to those 3 guys, I do want to say that for Houston, listen, guys, between Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins, they combined for 52 successful stops last season. Rankins will be the most experienced interior D lineman Collins has played with since arriving in Houston. He's one of the guys that I think Houston is really going to trust the most to play the A-gap whenever they really need to go out there and make a play against the run and help to set the rest of that defensive line. When he was in the game, the Jets only allowed 3.82 yards per rush compared to 4.13 without him. Okay, so that's an additional 3.3 yards that I'm not allowing. 3 yards I'm not allowing. He's helping that team out that much. Imagine what he can do for this team that has allowed 5.1 yards per carry, over 2,000 rushing yards, abysmal. And I meant to say 0.3 less yards. So to get back to your point, Thomas Booker going into his sophomore year, Roy Lopez going into his junior year, 3rd year in the NFL, Kirk Hennig going into his sophomore year. Mm-hmm. I don't see all 3 of them making the roster.
Okay.
Remember the Houston Texans did sign Byron Cowart in the offseason as well, the interior defensive lineman. And I think that we look at the overlooked battle with Jerry Hughes and John Gardner. This is the looked at battle, right? Hassan Ridgeway is also a guy that has some familiarity with DeMeco Ryans in this defense. Didn't play in a bunch of snaps for the 49ers. Has some experience in the NFL, but I also would group him into that three. So I'm going to go to four guys that, depending on how camp plays out, this is a battle that everybody should be looking at because your guys up front, Rankins, Collins, just re-signed Collins to an extension, signed Rankins in the offseason. You obviously like what he can do for you in the run game. Also gave the Jets 4 sacks last year, though he did play with Quentin Williams, one of not the top 2 defensive tackles in the NFL. He won't have that luxury here in Houston, but he does have a very good Malik Collins to play alongside of. And I like the pairing of that. However, somebody's going to have to give those big boys a break. Who do you trust the most? Is it Hassan Ridgeway, that you've seen playing this defense before under DeMeco Ryans? Or, I don't know why, but I'm pushing for Roy Lopez.
He's a fan favorite, that's why.
He is a fan favorite, but I think he may be the one that has the most experience and can beat the other guy out. Roy Lopez is one of those players that came in during a very bad time and really had a disservice to him because he played more than what he probably should. And so the game was coming a lot faster for him compared to coming out of college. Now, there isn't a rush all the time to get you out on the field. You got some very good vets in front of you, but that is a battle, guys, that I want everybody to keep their eye on. One of the smaller battles, but it's a bigger battle. Rotation will matter for this team. Who can come in when the next guy needs to be ready matters to this team. Kurt Hennis played some good football for Houston last year, and I wouldn't be shocked if he's kept on his team. Roy Lopez has had some moments, but he has been inconsistent throughout his first 2 years in the NFL, and I do want to give him the credit, benefit of the doubt at the same time. Did not have the best situation. Coward, Hassan Ridgeway, how will those two play out? But this D-line does have some depth. Not saying it's great depth, some decent depth, and I want to see how it plays out.
I honestly, and I hate to say this because I like Roy Lopez, but I think when you look at those four guys, John, he's the one that I would say the Texans will probably use the least because first and foremost, I think it's really going to come down to who's going to help them stop the run the most. You forgot my most important favorite stat that the Houston Texans had given up an average of 150 yards on the ground over the last 2 seasons. Kurt Hennig, out of all of those guys, according to Pro Football Focus, who finished his rookie campaign, I believe, with a run defensive grade of 60, he's the best run stopper of those 4. Thomas Booker, I think because Nick Caserio drafted him in the 5th round, and you also got to take into consideration that he is in his 2nd season. There's still a lot of potential there with him. I don't see the Houston Texans cutting ties with him. Hassan Ridgeway, he is the best pass rusher out of those 4. You go back to, I believe it was the 2021 campaign. In the limited amount of times of snaps that he did record 2 sacks and had a pass rush grade of 66.7. Roy Lopez is the only guy, both when you look at the numbers and look at on film, where it's like, okay, he doesn't stand out at stopping a run. He doesn't stand out getting after the quarterback. Not saying that he can't because he has, but I just think he's in a position where he's going to be, I don't want to say least talented, but he is the guy that's going to be the odd man out if it comes down to a battle between those 4 guys, because everything that Roy Lopez can do, either Hennig, Booker, or Ridgeway can do it even better.
I am curious to see. I said this a long time ago, right? When DeMeco Ryans got hired, we had a bunch of spaces going on Twitter around that time. I'm sorry. And one of the things I was curious about, I'm excited to see, because I love to see how coach mind can work and how they can pull out the best from a player. I want to see how they use Thomas Booker. I'm not sure, because Thomas Booker should be nowhere near the A-gap I'm sorry.
I agree, because I was just about to ask, do you think, and I think I noticed this last year, that he was playing out of position a little bit?
He's a smaller D tackle. He's physical. He has some good technique. I just don't think that he should be nowhere near the A gap, right? I think he's a little light in the ass. At least he was last year as a rookie. So coming into this year, I think that he has more of an athletic ability to affect the game. I could be overlooking it or underlooking it, but I am curious and excited to see how they try to pull the best out of that player, because he was pretty good at Stanford. Smart player, knows how to win reps. Doesn't necessarily get the numbers. Didn't last year, but Booker, Hennis, Lopez, Ridgeway, Coward, those guys are in a boat to where you group them together and say, okay, 3 out of 5 of y'all come on with us. The rest of y'all can go home. And so with that battle, each and every one of those players are going to have to do things that are just simply better than the next. The small details, the big details, making sure you play your assignment. Don't overrun it, right? If you're supposed to command that double team, command the double team. If you're supposed to stun on the outside quickly, make sure you get to your spot quickly. I'm curious to see how this defense operates, but I want to see how they utilize that young man who, like Roy Lopez, like Kirk Hennis last year, like everybody in the last 3 seasons, not a fair shake coming in terms of coaching and scheme. So we want to see how it plays out. Welcome back, guys. So before we close out today's show, y'all know we had to get to it. Will Anderson, Madden rating, was it 78, right?
Yes, sir.
The highest for, I can't remember if it was for a defensive rookie or just a defensive rookie end, but had an 87 speed. This young man will have expectations, right? And when we ask the question, we put it out there, and please hop in the YouTube comment section to let us know. The rookie expectations for Will Anderson, guys, is pretty high for me. This team traded up for you. This team gave up a first, a 33, something else, right? And so they believed in you. This is one of those picks where it was a gamble. No, I am not saying the gamble wasn't worth it or smart, but it was a gamble. And this pick will be tied to the legacy of Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans. We saw a very successful year from my man Hutchinson, who I became a fan of, Detroit, Thibodeau when he was able to come on for the New York Giants. A lot of people didn't see the good things that Trayvon Walker for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who went number 1 overall last year, did. Didn't necessarily show in his numbers in terms of stats, but he did some great things on the football field for the Jacksonville Jaguars, especially later on in the season and in that playoff game. It's not far-fetched to say that he can't go out there and be an impactful rookie. Do I want to put stats and numbers on it? I'll go ahead and do it. Right? I'm not going to be scared. 5.5 sacks. 5.5 sacks. Over. I'm going to take the over on 5.5 sacks. And I think that we should see a few tackles for loss. But I have high expectations for him. And I think that when I put him in the same category as Hutchinson, Hutchinson was a much better experienced pass rusher, naturally. But this team traded up for you. They gave away a lot. So I want to see this young man on the field, and I do have high expectations for him during his rookie year.
First of all, Hutchinson, rookie campaign, 34 solo hits, 9.5 sacks.
He was a dog. He was a dog.
Boy.
He was a dog.
That's part of the reason why the Detroit Lions are, turning things around after nearly 30 years almost. It seemed like, with the exception of the few years that Matthew Stafford, who I still believe is one of the most overrated quarterbacks of all time, but let's not get into that. He's part of the reason why Detroit, is in a situation where they can finally turn their franchise around. But John, I have high expectations for Will Anderson Jr. as well. However, one, I believe that out of all the rookies who have came into this franchise over the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years, I think Will Anderson Jr. is in the best situation that any rookie prospect has been in since the start of this rebuild. Because not only is he going to a franchise to where you can say, they gave up a lot for you and all this other stuff, but that trade showcased that the general manager and the coach, they believed in you. Just take a look at the package that they gave up. To and most importantly, he's coming to a team where the head coach has the ability to get the best out of his players. We have seen, just go back and take a look at the number of players in San Francisco who has credited DeMeco Ryans for the success they had over the last 2 seasons. And we are expecting DeMeco Ryans to help several guys on this roster for this upcoming year. We just finished talking about one, Thomas Booker. I think he's going to do wonders for a guy like John Gardner, another guy that we talked about in the first segment. However, every single one of those guys who had came into the season, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they all had to go through that stages of, bad coaching, playing in a system that is not suited to your skill set. Will Anderson Jr. isn't going to have that problem. And then 3, most importantly, he is going to go into a situation, and John, you might not agree with this, but to me, he's going to go into a situation where he doesn't have to be the top defensive lineman come day one of the regular season. Now, towards the end of his rookie campaign, if his development and everything is going right, then I would say, okay, now let's start putting some expectations on you that you have to be this team's number 1 best defensive lineman. However, he has an opportunity to learn from Jerry Hughes, to learn from John Gardner, to learn from Malik Collins. Like, he is just in a best position possible that any rookie over the last 4 years has gone through coming to the Houston Texans. And I think that is going to be very big for him. And it also showcased that the Texans are finally turning their franchise around. Now, as for numbers, I agree with you. About 5.5 sacks. I'm going to take the over on that. A couple tackles for loss. But my biggest expectation for him in his rookie season, we have an idea of how good we think this defensive line is going to be. I wanted to see it at least 5 times better. For example, this team has done a very good job at getting after the quarterback over the last 2 seasons. Let's say, for example, what's a solid number for a team overall sacks number? Just throw out a number really quick.
I would say 32.
32 with Will Anderson Jr. It better be 37 and a half. I want to see us say, you know what? This defensive line has gotten better under Coach DeMeco Ryans, but a primary reason why it got even better, 10 times better, it was due to the improvements and due to the expectations, due to the development, due to the promise and potential of Will Anderson Jr.
Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts as well. Make sure you give me a follow at John_Hickman12 and follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.